close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Turn us to thousands, and we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon. Turn us to thousands, and on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
Work and play.
I'm walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town.
And to get back in our car immediately. A few seconds of silence with my hand still on the door handle went by. Yelling was completely out of character for my dad, though I eventually listened to him and got back in our car. We drove off with not another word being said by either us or the guy. I couldn't help but notice the extremely disturbing and almost angry face of the driver as we drove past him.
Hey, I might was muted. My bad.
Once we got a few miles down the road, my dad would apologize for yelling at me. I of course told him it was fine, just that I wasn't really expecting it. I will never forget what he said next.
Oh, for real?
He said he felt like he had to, because while I was heading towards the guy's back door, through the window he could just barely make out the silhouettes of two men waiting on the other side. He would further explain that by the looks of their movements as I was walking towards the door, Upon opening the door, I would either be attacked, kidnapped, or worse. Hearing this was a complete shock to me. But to this day, I'm still glad my dad told me what he saw. It taught me at a young age that not everyone has the best intentions in this world. However, at the end of the day, we can't 100% confirm the guy had bad intentions. But I myself truly believe my dad's instincts were correct. The whole situation just didn't add up. Why would there have been two men waiting right at the door for me to open it? And on top of that, when we got to our new house, we were able to verify that nothing was missing from our trunk. Thinking about this whole experience still scares me, even today. This happened when I was 18. I had just finished up my first semester of college, and a couple friends I had met there planned to rent out a cabin on some lake over the weekend through Airbnb. They asked if I wanted to go, and I said yeah. I didn't really know much about the destination, but I decided I'd go regardless. I was done with finals, and honestly felt like I could just use some solid time away from it all. So my two friends and I, who I'll just call Brad and Dustin, were set to leave. The cabin was about an hour away. When we arrived, we unpacked the stuff we brought for the weekend and got settled inside. The first night was honestly kinda creepy, at least for me, because the cabin was pretty remote. It was the only one on the lake, and as far as I'm concerned, it was the only one within miles of nothing but forest. I'm someone who's used to being in cities with lots of people, not quiet forests with the occasional howl of coyotes. Needless to say, it was for sure a scene I would have to get used to. But all things considered, the first night was completely fine. It was the second night where things took a turn. All throughout the second day, a blizzard took place outside. We didn't really plan for it. I guess none of us thought to check the weather before making the trip. I mean, you gotta remember, all three of us were only 18 at the time, so not the brightest. Anyway, on the second night, Brad and I slept in our own bedrooms upstairs, while Dustin slept on a couch downstairs. I think it was around 2 AM when Dustin went upstairs and woke both of us up saying how the outside motion light kept turning on and off again. Brad told him it was most likely just an animal activating it, or the light simply being activated by the motion of the falling snow. But what Dustin responded with was pretty terrifying. He explained how that's what he thought too, but after looking outside, he saw what he described as something resembling the shadow of a person and around 6 foot tall. This definitely freaked us out a bit, but Brad, who was still convinced it had to be an animal, said he would go downstairs to check it out. And so that's what he did. Meanwhile, Dustin and I stayed upstairs. A good 3 minutes went by, when a blood-curdling scream rang out downstairs.
Oh, hey, Dad, but why are you investigating, bro? For real?
Dustin and I ran downstairs as fast as we could. Brad was lying on the floor and pointing at the living room window. We looked out the window, but there was nothing. He practically screamed at us to go upstairs, and so the three of us did. The rooms in the cabin didn't have locks, so we resorted to barricading ourselves in one of the bedrooms. Brad quietly explained to us that when he got downstairs, he started by looking out all the kitchen windows, and when he didn't see anything, he made his way to the living room window. He pulled back the curtain, and at first saw nothing, but not nothing like an empty snowy forest. He literally saw pure black darkness. Confused, he cupped his hands to his eyes and got closer to the window. But that's when he realized it was a person blocking the view.
Well, not really.
He then screamed and fell back. Now, at this point, I hadn't seen anything myself. Don't get me wrong, I was still horrified. But in the back of my mind, I still wasn't ruling out the fact that they might have just been imagining things. Just then, the power cut out. It felt like my heart had completely stopped for at least 5 seconds. I was now hysterical at this point. All doubt I had in the sightings Brad and Dustin experienced instantly vanished. I genuinely felt like my life was over in that moment. We had no weapons, and worse yet, no phone service. All we could do was sit and wait until daylight. Fortunately, nothing further would occur in that time. Once the sun was up, we took down the barricade and all started getting our stuff. We had no intentions of staying there any longer than we needed to. It was still snowing, but luckily the vehicle we brought was good in the snow. Before we left, we took a quick survey of the outside area around the cabin. There were no footprints, but this was likely because they were filled in by the snow. This had to have been the case, as there were no footprints by the fuse box outside, yet it was completely destroyed. It looked like it was smashed in multiple times by an axe. The sight of this was enough to get us to leave immediately. Later we tried contacting the Airbnb owner, but we got no response. I always thought this was weird. I mean, if your fuse box got completely destroyed, I'd imagine you'd want to talk to the people renting the cabin at the time. But no, not even a text back from the guy. I stayed friends with Brad and Dustin throughout the rest of college. We would talk about the experience from time to time, but for the most part we kept it to ourselves. We still don't know who was stalking us in the woods that night, or what their intentions were.
No, I can give you a few. To kill you, bro. There's a few right there.
When I was young, my parents moved around a lot. I must have attended 10 different schools during my life. My dad was the kind of man who shouldn't have had kids. He wouldn't keep a steady job and forced my mother and later my aunt to work long hours to support our family, which included 6 kids.
Oh, really?
He was a schemer and always looking for an angle to work. My earliest memories were bar fights and my dad robbing my piggy bank while he was drunk in the middle of the night.
No, I got beef
My
with
mom
dad.
followed him like a god. To this day, I don't understand why. He was physically violent with her, and she stayed with him for over 20 years until all the kids had grown. I guess she stayed for us more than anything. The story actually begins when I was 10 years old. My dad outfitted an old school bus with bunks, and we traveled across the country from Utah to Indiana and finally to Kentucky, where the bus engine died.
Oh, rip.
So the bus was our home for a long time, until Dad finally rented what could only be described as a shack on the side of a mountain. This was near Burkesville, in what is known as the Cumberland Gap. Very mountainous with steep hills, with gravel roads carved into the mountains. The house we rented was from an old man named Howard, who owned a gas station and convenience store where 2 roads intersected. Howard was a good old man who took a liking to my dad. He used to give us the flat sodas from his gas station when we were waiting on
Gang, I'm not gonna lie though. My mouth is on fire, so I'll be right back. Bro. Gang, we is bad, right now, bro.
on the bus.
Get back to it.
For us, it was a very rare treat to drink anything more than water. There were 6 of us kids all together. Marty, who was just a baby, Michael, who was in kindergarten, my sisters Jean and Carol Ann, who were in 3rd, and my brother Jim, who was in the 2nd grade. I was the oldest in 4th grade. We would walk down a steep gravel road that was about a quarter of a mile from the house each day to the bus stop. I remember the gravel road was overgrown and had old houses that were dilapidated on both sides.
And hi to you, my brother.
The town had been part of the company housing for a coal mine that closed up back in
Oh my gosh. Oh man, have a good night, man.
the 50s. Kudzu and vines covered houses. Old trucks and cars that were no more than rust piles lined the sides of the road, looking out of the brush as if they were trying to hide. Howard called it the Coal Mine Road. The house we lived in was at the top of the hill from the gas station, then about a quarter-mile down Coal Mine Road on the right. It was the only house not grown over with kudzu and weeds. The road kept going to a clearing where Howard had an oil rig. I remember there were copperhead snakes, and we'd keep ourselves at the center of the road so no one would get snake bit. Sometimes they would come out onto the gravel and warm in the sun, especially early in the morning. We would throw gravel at them to keep them back. We were warned never to venture off the path because Howard had told us that there were hidden dangers all around. Old cellars that had caved in, uncovered wells, and of course, the snakes. Mom was very careful to keep us all near or in the house as much as she could. But being the oldest boy, I would be sent out to get coal from a coal pile. A potbelly stove was all we had for heat. It was a chance to goof off and look around, throwing old rocks at the windows of those old houses I could see through the woods. One day, Mama asked me to go out and bring in some coal. I was watching TV on a black and white TV set in the bedroom, and I didn't want to get up. So I acted like I didn't hear Mom ask. She finally came in the room fussing and said that if I didn't get the coal right now, it would be dark. So out I went. We had an old wheelbarrow that we used to bring the coal up to the house. Then we'd take a few large pieces in and put them beside the stove. For those of you who don't know, coal is very dirty, and it gets all over you.
Yeah, not really.
The old wheelbarrow had a steel wheel that needed grease and would squeal as you pushed it down the road and over to a pile of coal that Howard had brought out for us to keep warm. In a lot of ways, I think Howard worried about us in that old drafty house. This was sort of his way of helping. It was already dark when I shoveled the last of the coal into the wheelbarrow and turned toward the house. Then I saw something. On the road past our home, there was a light.
Oh, really?
It was dim like an old lantern. Dad wasn't home, that I knew. He was working at a blue jean factory 4 hours away, and he wouldn't be home until Friday. The light bobbed as it came slowly up the road, like someone walking. There was nothing down that road now. No reason for anyone to be coming up from the old oil rig and coal mine, and if it was Howard, he would have taken his truck instead of walking. And yet here it was, a dim yellow light that seemed to keep a steady pace.
My boy, that's not Pops, though. Like, my boy, you gotta run the opposite direction. What are you doing?
Toward me. I gave the wheelbarrow a push.
Oh my lord.
Then I stopped. If they didn't know I was here now, that would have told them. I dropped the handles of the wheelbarrow and made a run for the house, hoping I could beat the lantern carrier. As I ran the 100 yards or so to the house, the lantern grew closer, but kept its steady pace, not pausing. I could see it was a lamp, flickering with a very dirty, dusty glass cover. I could make out a single person in the light of the lamp as it swung at the end of the arm, walking ever closer to me and my home. I burst through the door of the house and yelled, "Mama? there's someone out there on the road, behind the house.
Mama? Mm.
Mom came out of the kitchen and came to a halt just inside the living room. There was no doubt based on my face that I'd seen something. I wasn't overly afraid of the dark, and Mom knew that. I didn't spook easily, and she knew I was usually the one who got rid of the snakes and defended the younger kids from bullies.
Dang.
She said in a calm voice, "Lock the door." I ran back to the front door and shut it quickly, not taking time to look for the lantern. I turned the old deadbolt lock and a homemade wooden lock we had made with a nail and a flat piece of wood. Mom came into the living room with a single 16-gauge shotgun.
Hey, yo, get the shot.
Her dad gave her that gun, and that may be the only reason we still had it, because she refused to let Dad sell it. By this time, the other kids were coming into the room. She told them in a hushed voice to go to the bedroom and lock the door. It must have been the tone of her voice, because they did exactly that.
Hey, yo, what?
I could hear Marty crying behind the door and my oldest sister hushing him. She walked around cutting off lights, the kitchen, the hall where the potbelly stove was, the living room. The house had those old string lights to a single bulb, so as each light went out, the house grew very dark. The only light was the light of the porch light and the light from under the bedroom door. Mama began to peek out the windows. First, she looked out the kitchen window. The back door was locked, I could see. She peeked out the small window in the door then, and then the living room windows, then the bathroom. Nothing. She turns to me and asks, "Are you sure you saw someone?" I answered quickly, "Yes, they had a lantern and were walking up the road."
Yeah?
"From the mine?" She was looking at me intently with a furrowed brow now, her voice raised like she was questioning the information. "You better be telling me the truth," she responded flatly, rechecking each window. I was hurt and at the same time angered by her lack of belief. I then started checking the windows myself, but I didn't see anything either. Finally, Mom opens the front door and steps out on the porch. She goes to the edge and looks up and down the road. I peeked out from behind her and didn't see anything either. The moon was above the trees now, and you could see clearly there wasn't anyone on the road. I guess it would be easy enough to turn off the lantern and slip into the woods, but why? We didn't have any kind of flashlight, so we had to just strain our eyes and see what we could. Nothing moved. No noises came from the woods, but we could hear the other kids bumping around in the bedroom. We went back inside and shut the door. She put the shotgun in the corner by the door and looked at me with surprising compassion after such a scare. "Maybe we have enough coal for the night." She smiled at me. "I really saw something, Mama." I once again insisted. "Maybe it was Howard. We'll ask him in the morning." She walked back to the kitchen, leaving me standing by the door. The next morning, I woke to a very cold house. No one else was up, but the fire had burned down to cinders, and there wasn't any more coal in the house. I got up, slid on my pants and shoes. I went to the front door and saw the shotgun was still in the corner by the door, where Mama had left it the night before. I peeked out the living room window. Everything that had happened the night before returning fresh to my memory. Unlocking the front door, I opened it and I looked outside. My mouth dropped open. The wheelbarrow filled with the coal I'd loaded the night before was now just sitting on the porch. Someone had taken the wheelbarrow to the house and up the 5 steps to the porch without anyone hearing it.
Crazy.
One more thing. Sitting on top of the coal was an old kerosene lantern.
Oh, really?
I poked my head out into the brisk air. I thought it was cold in the house until that frosty October morning met my bare arms and face. I looked up and down the old road and around the house, no sign of anyone. I brought in a couple of pieces of coal and started up the fire. We never did find out who my mystery helper was. We found out later that day that Howard had been out of town at a doctor's office in Versailles, and Dad didn't come home until later that Saturday afternoon. Howard said it looked like one of the old lanterns in an old storage shed near the entrance of the mine. Dad, Howard, and I walked out the road the next day. I remember I had a hard time keeping up, it was so grown over. Howard toted an old black revolver, and Dad had Mom's shotgun. First, we went to the old shed. The door was bolted, and the padlock was rusted beyond opening. We then traipsed through the tall weeds and kudzu until dark, checking each of the old houses. But they were all still boarded up. There were no signs of entry, except for some broken-out windows that were probably from my rocks. From that day forward, I went out early to get the coal, with the exception of a few really cold nights. Those nights I did venture out after dark, I took my lantern.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. That's the end of the live stream. Thank y'all for stopping by. Mr. Maybe, we is out, baby.